It started with a smile, Delilah's usual, warm lipsticked kind, and a sealed manila envelope she placed right in the middle of our dining table like it was dessert. We weren't even done with dinner. She poured me another glass of wine, kissed my cheek, and said, "I've got something for you. Just some family papers." I didn't think twice. That was the tone she used when mailing birthday cards to nieces or handling HOA forms. I took another bite of roasted chicken, wiped my hands on the napkin, and slid the envelope open without suspicion. What spilled out wasn't sentimental. It wasn't cute or harmless or bureaucratic. What fell into my lap was a copy of a mortgage agreement. My eyes scanned the first page, then locked on the borrower's name at the top, my name. Government ID, signature, employment history, everything. A loan secured under my identity for a 2-story colonial in Brookline. I blinked, trying to steady the room. What is this?" I asked. My voice wasn't even angry yet, just confused. She leaned her elbows on the table, her tone unnervingly calm. "It's for Tricia, my sister. She's finally going to get her own place. We've been planning this for a while." I looked at her like she was speaking in Morse code. "We?" I asked. "Who's we?" That's when I noticed Margot and Ruben, her parents, seated quietly across the room, on the couch like an audience waiting for the lights to come up. Margot had her arms crossed, her face tight, with something between smugness and righteousness. Ruben nodded once, solemnly, as if I were at some intervention. "You're the most financially stable," Delilah said, gently, as if that justified what they'd done. "We decided you should be the one to pay for the house." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the absurdity hit me like a slap I hadn't registered yet. "You what?" I asked, stunned, holding the paper like it might burst into flames if I kept touching it. "Delilah, this mortgage is in my name. My credit, my income, my signature. I didn't agree to this. I never signed anything." She tilted her head slightly, that same patronizing smile spreading wider. "Well, Tricia deserves a fresh start. We thought this would be the easiest way." "You thought forging my name was the easiest way?" I snapped. My heartbeat had climbed into my throat. "You forged my signature." Margot stood up and walked toward the table, placing her hand on my shoulder like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Family doesn't always wait for everyone to catch up," she said. "We made a decision. You're part of this family, so it includes you." Ruben chimed in from behind her. "It's not about the money, son. It's about support." "Support?" I said, rising slowly from my seat. "This isn't support. This is fraud." The word hung in the air like a dirty secret no one wanted to acknowledge. I held the documents out to Delilah. "You signed this. You signed for me. You forged everything." She didn't deny it. She didn't even flinch. "Tricia needed it," she said again, as if that line alone could excuse everything. "We knew you'd be angry at first, but it's just paperwork. It'll be paid off quickly. You won't even notice." I stared at the glass of wine she'd just poured me, my untouched plate, the golden lighting above our dining table that suddenly felt more like an interrogation lamp than a chandelier. It hit me all at once. They had planned this. They had sat down and filled out these documents together, printing out forms, using my social security number, my job history, even copying my signature from old leases and driver's licenses. And none of them had the decency to tell me before handing me the bill. I stood there for what felt like years. I wasn't even sure if my legs were still holding me up. Then I walked toward the hallway, grabbed my jacket from the hook, and turned back only once. "I'm going to need some air," I said. Margot looked at Delilah. "He's just overwhelmed," she said. "He'll come around." "No," I said, sharper this time. "I won't." I left. Not just the house, but something more permanent. That night, I didn't sleep in our bedroom. I didn't return to our bed or our shared bathroom or the side of the closet I'd carefully filled over the past 7 years. I pulled the guest room door closed behind me, locking it out of habit even though I knew no one would bother me. I sat on the edge of the twin bed and stared at the mortgage documents until my eyes ached. The numbers danced, but the betrayal sat still. Solid. Immovable. They had done this without hesitation, without warning, without remorse. And Delilah, my wife, the woman I thought I'd build a life with, had done it with a smile. That night I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even call anyone. I just lay on the stiff guest bed, my arms crossed like a man waiting for a sentence to be handed down. And in the quiet of that room, With the heating vent humming above me and the distant sound of her family laughing in the living room like nothing had just imploded, I realized something simple and devastating. I wasn't their family. I was their plan. The next morning, I was gone. They called it a family meeting, but the air was too curated for conversation. The table was already set when I arrived. Wine poured, silverware aligned, candles flickering like it was Thanksgiving instead of what it really was. A setup. Delilah met me at the door in her softest sweater, the one she wore when she wanted to disarm me. "Let's eat first," she said. "Talk after." That should have been my warning. But I was tired, physically, mentally, emotionally. And I wanted to believe there was still some piece of normal left between us. I sat. Reuben gave a toast about transition and growth. Margot offered a vague prayer for family unity. And Trisha just smiled like she'd already won. She didn't even fake humility, which almost made it easier. Almost. I barely touched my food. My stomach churned with the weight of questions I hadn't yet dared to ask. Delilah sat to my right, refilling my wine as if topping off my patience. It wasn't until dessert, some overly sweet almond tart, that Margot slid a folder next to my plate like a check at the end of a meal. "We've taken the liberty of organizing everything," she said. I didn't even open it. "Organizing what?" I asked, pushing it back toward the center of the table. Reuben cleared his throat. "Trisha's finally moving out of our home. She's got the keys to the new place. Now it's about formalizing things." My eyes jumped from face to face. "You mean the house, the one in Brookline? The one bought with a mortgage in my name?" "Yes," Delilah said softly. "We thought this dinner would be a good time to get everything aligned. You're in the best position to make it all official." I blinked. "Make what official?" "You already signed the mortgage. You forged my name. You stole my identity." The words landed like thunder, but no one flinched. "This is fraud," I said, louder. "You can't just brush it off with red wine and roasted duck." Delilah leaned in, resting her chin on her hand. "You're overreacting." "Am I?" I asked. "Because last I checked, identity theft is a crime. You signed legal documents on my behalf. You never asked me. You decided." Margot stepped in before Delilah could respond. "You're financially stable. You have excellent credit. We figured this would be a contribution that makes sense. Trisha needs a stable place to start fresh. She's been through so much." "We all have," I shot back. "But we don't all steal to cope." Reuben put down his fork and spoke like a man giving a sermon. "Family helps family. You have more than enough to share." "That's not the point," I said, my voice cracking now. "This isn't about money. It's about choice. You didn't give me one." Delilah's eyes narrowed. "You're making this unnecessarily difficult." I looked at her, stunned. "Unnecessarily? You're trying to gaslight me into thinking I owe you this. That I'm wrong for being angry." I didn't agree to any of this. "We didn't think we had to ask," Margot said. "That's not how family works." "Then what is this?" I said, gesturing to the folder beside my plate. "Because this looks a lot like paperwork to me." No one answered. That silence was everything. It confirmed what I already knew. They had been planning this for months, maybe longer. And they weren't sorry. They were just sorry I found out. I pushed back from the table, napkin falling to the floor. "I'm done," I said. "We're not signing anything. We're not discussing this like it's normal. You committed fraud." "You're being dramatic," Delilah muttered. "And you're being criminal," I replied. "I'm going to call a lawyer." That's when Reuben stood up. "You call a lawyer, and you'll be breaking this family in half." "No," I said, walking toward the door. "You broke it the moment you forged my name and expected me to thank you for it." I didn't take the folder. I didn't even take my coat. I left the house with nothing but a wallet and the weight of betrayal pressing into my spine like a blade. That night, I didn't go home. I drove around until the highway lights blurred my vision, ended up at a budget hotel just off Route 9, checked in under my middle name, and stared at the ceiling fan until morning. I replayed every conversation, every subtle moment I'd ignored. The way Delilah deflected when I asked about bank statements. How Margot suddenly took interest in my income. How Reuben had asked, "Would you ever help someone buy a house?" like it was a theoretical exercise. I'd missed the signs because I believed they wouldn't cross certain lines. But they had, and now I had to figure out what to do with the ruins. The next morning, I returned to the house not to reconcile, but to gather my things. I walked in quietly, avoiding the dining room, now a crime scene of memory. Delilah was upstairs. I didn't stop to explain. I packed 2 bags, grabbed my laptop, and left a short note on the counter. This isn't support. It's betrayal. I need space. I didn't know more than that. I drove to Darian's office that afternoon, my friend from college who had gone on to become a financial crimes attorney. I dropped the documents on his desk like evidence in a trial. He flipped through them, frowning deeper with each page. They used your social security number, he said, and forged your signature on 3 separate documents. This isn't some misunderstanding. This is identity theft. I wanted to scream, but instead, I just nodded. I know. He looked up at me, his expression sharper now. You ready to fight this? More than ready, I said. Because they think they can do this and get away with it. That night, I stayed with a friend. I didn't answer Delilah's texts. I didn't respond to Margot's voicemails. I needed space to breathe, to think, to reclaim my narrative before they rewrote it completely. In the span of 2 nights, I had gone from husband to defendant. But what they didn't count on was this. I wasn't going to fold. I wasn't going to protect their image while they buried mine. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. I hadn't started this, but I would damn well finish it. The first person I called after I left Delilah's house for good was Darian Holmes. We hadn't talked much since college. Just the occasional holiday text and the kind of silent loyalty that never really needs maintenance. But the moment I told him I needed legal help, he answered on the first ring. What's going on? He asked. I didn't ease into it. I told him everything. The mortgage, the forged documents, the fake signatures, the house I'd never seen but was somehow financially married to. They put it in your name without consent? He asked, his tone darkening. Used your social, your income? All of it, I said. Delilah said it was a family decision. Like that's supposed to excuse it. Darian didn't curse often, but I heard a low muttered one under his breath. Send me everything you have, emails, texts, scan docs. I'll go through it all tonight. That night I sat in a dim Airbnb with nothing but a laptop, my phone, and 2 duffel bags of clothes. I opened the email thread from Delilah and her family. Dozens of group messages, each more shameless than the last. Trisha had sent a celebratory photo with the keys. New beginnings, thanks to the best brother-in-law ever. Delilah replied, you earned this. We're all in this together. Margot added a thumbs up, and Ruben had written something about doing what's right, even when others don't understand yet. I forwarded all of it to Darian. The next morning, he called me. They're not stupid, he said. Just entitled. This wasn't a slip-up. This was a calculated move. They forged your signature on 3 key forms, the loan application, the closing documents, and the property deed. You're on the hook for nearly $500,000 unless we move fast. I already knew that, but hearing it from someone with credentials made it feel heavier. Like a judge had already banged a gavel in my stomach. Can we fix it? I asked. We can fight it, he replied. Step 1 is sending a cease and desist. Step 2 is notifying the mortgage company and getting your name flagged on the account. If we can prove identity theft, we can trigger an internal fraud investigation. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Let's do it. Within 24 hours, the cease and desist went out. Darian copied me on the email chain. It was a hard stop in legal tone, backed with enough citations and statute references to make a court clerk sweat. And for a moment, I let myself believe it might scare them. I should have known better. 3 days later, I got a voicemail from Ruben. If you don't step up, he said in that father-in-law tone he used when pretending to be calm, we'll take this to court. You'll regret forcing this into the public eye. It doesn't have to get ugly, but if you make it ugly, don't say we didn't try. I sat there with my thumb hovering over the delete button, but I didn't press it. I saved it. Darian had taught me better. Anytime someone threatens legal action, save everything, he had said. Voicemails, emails, even screenshots of deleted posts. People get bold until evidence hits the table. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid of court, but because I was angry at how easily they twisted what was mine. My name, my credibility, my sense of agency, and how none of them even pretended to feel guilty. I scrolled through my phone again, just to torture myself with the evidence. One group chat message from Delilah still stuck out. It's not like he can't afford it. That line burned. As if having the means meant forfeiting the right to choose how those means were used. They treated my success like it was a public resource, a community fund. And that was the part no one else seemed to understand. Even friends who meant well would say, can't you just fix it quietly? Quiet fixes are how they get away with it. How they write you out of your own life and call it kindness. Darian and I built a timeline. Every document date. Every message. Every financial statement that showed I hadn't authorized a cent. He found a forensic handwriting expert to examine the signatures. It's crude, she said. They probably used a digital trace. I've seen this kind of forgery before, usually by family members who think it's harmless. Harmless. The word rattled around in my skull like loose screws. Harmless doesn't leave you with a $480,000 liability. Harmless doesn't follow you through background checks and credit pulls. Harmless doesn't require cease and desist and courtroom dates. By the end of the week, the mortgage company responded. They'd flagged the account and paused payments pending investigation. It wasn't resolution, but it was movement. It was someone, finally, taking this seriously. I thought that might shake Delilah's family into silence. I was wrong. Trisha posted a story on social media. A photo of the house with the caption, "He promised to help. Now he's ghosting." Delilah reshared it with a sad face emoji and the words, "Family over ego." Margot uploaded a screenshot of my LinkedIn bio and salary estimate from Glassdoor, tagging it, just saying, "Some people forget where they came from." They didn't deny anything. They just spun it. Like I was punishing them. Like the crime wasn't the forgery, it was my refusal to swallow it. Darian laughed bitterly when I showed him the screenshots. Classic smear campaign. We'll include this in the emotional distress component of the counterclaim. Counterclaim? I asked. You think they're going to sue me? He didn't hesitate. Yes, because in their mind, you're the villain now. And villains get punished. They'll want to preemptively strike before this gets too real. And he was right. I could feel it coming. The legal papers, the demands, the accusations that I was the one who broke the family apart. But that was fine. Let them sue. Let them scream and spin and call it betrayal. I was done trying to explain dignity to people who only understood leverage. I wasn't fighting over a house. I was fighting for my right to say, no. That line in the sand, the one they thought they could blur with obligation and guilt, I'd drawn it now in permanent ink. It was a Thursday morning like any other. Cold, quiet, the kind of air that made you hug your coffee mug a little tighter. I was at my new place, a small rental apartment above a bookstore on Chestnut Hill Avenue. The kind of place that smelled faintly of paper and cinnamon, where you could almost convince yourself life was rebuilding itself brick by brick. I was still in sweats when I heard the knock. Not a neighborly knock, not a casual one. It was deliberate, 3 firm raps, followed by silence. I opened the door, expecting maybe a delivery or someone trying to sell window cleaning. Instead, a man in a navy jacket handed me a manila envelope and said, "You've been served." Just like that. No emotion. No explanation. No sympathy. He turned and left before I could ask a single thing. I stared at the envelope like it was radioactive. And maybe it was, because inside those stiff corners lived the confirmation that war had officially begun. I tore it open, my fingers trembling, heart pounding, and there it was. A lawsuit. Filed by Delilah, Margot, Ruben, and Trisha. They were suing me for $480,000, the full value of the Brookline property. I sat down, the floor feeling like it tilted under my feet. My eyes darted over the accusations. The defendant verbally agreed to support the plaintiff in acquiring a residence. The defendant accepted the role of financial provider within the extended family dynamic. The defendant benefited emotionally and reputationally from the arrangement. That one almost made me laugh, until the weight of it settled on my chest like stone. They were rewriting the truth in legalese, crafting a version of events where I wasn't the victim of forgery and manipulation. I was a man reneging on a promise. A deadbeat in a tailored suit. I called Darian immediately. He picked up on the first ring again. "Tell me you're reading this with me," I said. "I am," he said. "Just got the same document scanned over. This is ambitious." "Ambitious?" I barked. "This is psychotic." "It's strategic," he said calmly. "They're trying to flip the narrative. If they can convince a judge there was a verbal agreement, it muddies the water on the fraud. It becomes a he said, she said. And people hate financial disputes between family. It turns sympathy into suspicion." I ran my hands through my hair, pacing the tiny living room. "They're trying to bankrupt me emotionally and financially. Then we fight harder," Darian said. "We file a motion to dismiss. We countersue. We drag every forgery, every screenshot, every voicemail into the light. You're not backing down. Not now." He was right, but I was exhausted. Not just tired, bone deep, soul worn, betrayed in every direction, exhausted. I'd been sucker punched by the one person who promised partnership. And now she wanted to take me to court like I was a stranger off the street who had wronged her. I remembered the first time I met Delilah's parents. How Margot had hugged me a little too tightly, whispering, "Finally, someone stable." How Reuben had shaken my hand and said, "You're the kind of man who shows up." I showed up. I showed up for birthdays and surgeries and Trisha's mental health spirals. I showed up even when it drained me. But now, apparently, I hadn't shown up in the one way they truly valued, financially. My phone buzzed again. A new text from Delilah. "You can still end this quietly. Let's not destroy what's left." I stared at the words for a long time. Not because they confused me, but because they were so predictably cruel in their fake softness. I typed back, then erased it. Then typed again. Finally, I just wrote, "What's left was already destroyed the moment you signed my name," and smiled about it. I didn't send it. I wouldn't waste my truth on someone who distorted it so easily. Instead, I added it to the folder, my growing arsenal of receipts, lies, and betrayals. Darian got to work. He drafted the countersuit within 48 hours. Fraud, emotional distress, defamation. We included the voicemail from Reuben, the social media post from Margot and Trisha, the group chat screenshots. Every sentence they thought would pressure me became part of my defense. It was almost poetic. Delilah thought the courtroom would break me, but it was becoming the place where I'd finally be heard. I didn't tell anyone else. Not coworkers. Not casual friends. The shame was still too fresh. The fear of being seen as the guy who got played. But every night, I sat down and documented it all. What they said, how they said it, the way it made me feel like a ghost inside my own identity. One night, I stared at the wall for hours, playing back every warning sign I'd ignored. The times Delilah avoided talking about finances. How she once joked, "You're the safest bet in the room." How Trisha always seemed to expect things, not ask for them. And how I mistook tolerance for trust. I let myself cry that night. Not because I missed Delilah, I didn't, but because I missed the version of me who believed in her. The man who thought love would be enough. That marriage meant mutual respect, not manipulation wrapped in affection. In the weeks that followed, I started to steel myself. I stopped checking their posts. I stopped reading the texts I never answered. I focused on the facts, on truth, on reclaiming my name, my narrative, my peace. Because if they wanted a courtroom battle, they were going to get one. But this time, I'd come armed with evidence, with truth, with resolve. They served me on a cold Thursday morning. What they didn't know is that they also served notice. I wasn't theirs anymore. And I was done being quiet. It started with a repost. Just a quick notification buzz on my phone as I sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, trying to catch my breath between court preparations and the reality of being blindsided by the people I once called family. Trisha had shared a photo of herself standing on the front steps of the Brookline house, sunlight catching the curls of her hair just right, keys held high like a trophy. The caption read, "He promised to help," then walked away. Family should never be conditional. My stomach nodded, but I kept scrolling. Delilah had reposted it with a line of her own, "Family over ego. Always." Then Margot chimed in with something even more unhinged, a screenshot of my Glassdoor salary range, tagged. "Just a reminder, he can afford it. He just won't." The narrative was in full swing now. The headlines they crafted were small but sharp, designed not for truth but for sympathy. They weren't telling the story of forged documents or identity theft. They were spinning abandonment, selfishness, a man too proud to help his struggling in-laws. And the part that burned? It worked. People started commenting. Friends we once hosted for dinner, people who stood beside me at my wedding, started posting things like, "He's always been a little distant," or, "If it were me, I'd help my wife's sister." Blood is blood. I sat there in the coffee shop, surrounded by strangers sipping lattes, while my life was being boiled down to a few curated screenshots and a cruel narrative. They turned my stability into a weapon. My ability to provide, something I had once been proud of, became the very thing they used to shame me. I wasn't a man who said no to fraud. I was the villain who refused to be generous. I wanted to scream, to stand up and shake the room. To yell, they forged my signature. To shout, they manipulated me. But none of that fit in an Instagram caption. And in today's world, if it doesn't trend, it doesn't exist. Even people I thought were neutral started reaching out, their messages laced with uncomfortable diplomacy. "Hey, just checking in. Hope you and Delilah work it out." Or worse, I saw what Trisha posted, Maybe you could just help her a little and avoid the drama. As if it was about the money. As if the principle behind it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than any dollar amount. I wasn't fighting because I couldn't afford it. I was fighting because no one should be able to take what's yours, your name, your agency, your right to choose, and expect a thank you for it. I wasn't an ATM. I wasn't their safety net. I was a human being who deserved consent before commitment. That night, I sat down with Darian in his office, the soft glow of the desk lamp the only light between us. They're not backing down, I told him. They're winning the public side of it. He sighed. They're leveraging what people respond to, emotion, family, sob stories. But in court, the facts will speak louder. And until then, I asked, until then, you breathe. You survive it. Because this, he gestured to the printouts of their posts, is noise. It's noise meant to make you quit. And you're not quitting. I wasn't. But God, I was tired. Tired of defending my character to people who didn't deserve explanations. Tired of carrying the weight of being the villain in someone else's bedtime story. Tired of knowing that even when I won the legal battle, the damage would linger like smoke after a fire. What they were doing wasn't just public manipulation, it was strategic cruelty. They were using love, former love, as leverage. Love as a justification. Love as a trap. That was the hardest part. Because love isn't supposed to do that. Love isn't supposed to come with contracts hidden inside sealed envelopes. Love isn't supposed to say, if you really cared, you'd co-sign your own betrayal. They built this illusion where my refusal to be exploited made me heartless. Where my ability to pay meant I had no right to protest how that payment was decided. I stopped responding to people. I deleted the social media apps from my phone. I didn't need to read another passive-aggressive post tagged, "Some people only show up when it benefits them." I already knew who it was for. Let them have their curated grief. Let them bathe in their victimhood and applause. Because when the courtroom doors opened, they wouldn't be holding followers. They'd be holding forged documents. Real evidence. Not opinion. Not pity. Truth. I walked into that phase of the fight with a different kind of clarity. I wasn't fighting to convince them. I was fighting to protect the version of me that still believed he deserved better. I was fighting for the right to say, this is not okay, and not be punished for it. Being married didn't mean being owned. Being generous didn't mean being disposable. And being silent had only ever made them louder. So I spoke. I documented. I gathered receipts. I prepared not just to defend myself, but to reclaim the part of me they tried to shame. I wasn't their villain. I wasn't their bank. I wasn't their scapegoat. I was done playing their narrative. And no matter how loud they got, I'd remind them in court, and after, that no one gets to decide your value just because they've known your name. The courthouse smelled like old paper and colder intentions. I sat in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, a manila folder balanced on my lap. Darian beside me in a navy suit that made him look more like a storm than an attorney. His jaw was tight, eyes scanning the agenda for the day like a sniper reviewing targets. I couldn't sit still. My right leg bounced uncontrollably, the nerves creeping through my suit like ants under skin. This was it. The day the story moved from whispers and screenshots to affidavits and exhibits. The day we handed over truth and waited to see if the law still respected it. When they walked in, it felt theatrical. Delilah in a pale gray blazer dress, her curls tamed, her makeup just dramatic enough to frame her face with grief. Trisha beside her, dressed in soft pink like the human embodiment of wounded innocence. Ruben looked rehearsed, and Margot? She looked smug, like this was a dinner party she'd already hosted in her head with a standing ovation at the end. No one looked at me. I didn't expect them to. The bailiff called us in. Courtroom 3B wasn't large, no elevated judge's bench, no echoing ceilings, just rows of tired wooden pews and fluorescent lighting that drained the color from everything. Judge Carmela Reyes entered briskly, a woman who'd clearly seen enough family disasters wrapped in legal fabric to spot manipulation from across a parking lot. We rose. Saturday. Waited. Darian opened strong. Your Honor, he began, voice smooth and steady, this is not a disagreement between family members. This is not about generosity denied. This is a case of identity theft, fraudulent mortgage documentation, emotional and reputational damage, and an orchestrated manipulation that disguised theft as sentiment. He handed over a thick binder. Tabs. Highlights. Forensic signature analysis. Screenshots. Cease and desist copies. Even Ruben's voicemail. Judge Reyes flipped through it silently, her eyes unreadable. Then she looked up. Plaintiffs? Their attorney, a man named Jeffers who looked like he specialized in estate disputes and fake empathy, stood. Your Honor, this is a tragic case of miscommunication. Our clients acted under the impression that there was verbal consent. The defendant had, in many previous conversations, indicated a desire to help Tricia secure stability. The paperwork was initiated as a formality. Reyes raised an eyebrow. A formality? Jeffers nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Informal understanding within family units is not unusual. And forging someone's signature? She asked. He hesitated. We don't believe it was forged. We believe it was authorized in spirit. I almost laughed. In spirit. Like my ghost gave consent. Darian stood again. We have submitted 3 expert analyses of the forged signature. The style does not match the defendant's handwriting, and the metadata shows the documents were uploaded from a computer linked to Margot Wynn's business. That's when Darian dropped the bomb. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have email exchanges between the plaintiffs that show premeditation. He handed over a printed chain of messages from Delilah and Margot. One line from Margot's email burned across the page. He'll never agree. Just move forward and pressure him after it's done. Another from Delilah. Get Tricia in before he realizes. He'll have to play along once she's living there. The silence was absolute. Reyes leaned forward. Mrs. Wynn, did you write this? Delilah's voice was small but clear. Yes, but it was taken out of context. Reyes snapped. Is there any context where get Tricia in before he realizes means anything other than deceit? Delilah's face flushed. Her hands trembled, but her eyes remained dry. The tears would come later, rehearsed and placed like pearls on a necklace. Then Tricia took the stand. She looked at me for the first time in weeks. No apology in her eyes. Just calculation. I really believed he wanted to help, she said. He always said he wanted me to succeed. He even mentioned it would be easier if we bought something under his name. Did he say that in writing? Reyes asked. No, she admitted. But he didn't say no either. That line, that twisted little blade. As if silence equaled consent. As if my failure to preemptively object gave them permission to rewrite the terms of my life. Then it was Reuben's turn. He tried the patriarch act. Somber, disappointed, full of poetic phrases about duty and togetherness. It was never meant to hurt him, he said. We thought of it as stepping in for someone too cautious to do what's right. Reyes didn't flinch. Signing someone else's name is not stepping in. It's not miscommunication. It's fraud. Then she turned to Margot. Mrs. Wynn, do you have any idea how many years prison carries for mortgage fraud? Margot's lips twitched. We didn't mean it that way. There is no other way, Reyes said, her voice low, final. You signed his life away and called it love. Finally, Delilah was called. Her voice broke once. Just once. She reached for a tissue halfway through, and I knew that moment was chosen with care. She gave a soft monologue about family obligation, about me being too career-focused, about how Tricia just needed one break. I thought he'd forgive me eventually, she said, voice cracking. And you thought forging his name was the best way to get there? Reyes asked. Delilah didn't answer. She didn't have one. I didn't take the stand. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for me. Every message. Every lie. Every signature that wasn't mine. And so I watched. I watched the people who once hugged me over Christmas ham and welcomed me with champagne unravel their own credibility. Not because I pushed, but because they believed too strongly that they'd never be held accountable. As we left the courtroom, Darian clapped a hand on my shoulder. She's going to come down hard, he said. I nodded, but my throat was dry. Good. Because this wasn't just about legal wins. This was about letting the consequences finally catch the people who had always floated above them. This was about someone in power saying the thing I had been whispering to myself for months. This was never love. This was control. And that courtroom? That tired room with fluorescent lights and peeling benches? It became the place where the truth finally echoed louder than their lies. 9 days. That's how long it took. 9 long, unraveling days of waiting. Of checking my phone every hour like a lifeline. Staring at emails that said nothing and messages from Darian that always ended with soon. I stopped sleeping the way normal people do. I'd fall asleep for 20 minutes, then jolt awake like the judgment would arrive in the dark and tap on my window. I lived in limbo, between clarity and collapse. But then, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed, and this time, it was real. Darian didn't say hello. He just breathed, then said, "We got it." I stood frozen in the middle of my kitchen, one hand on the kettle. "Tell me." The judge dismissed their case. With prejudice. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let the words settle. With prejudice. That meant they couldn't refile. Couldn't try again with new wording or a new story or a new mask. It was over. The nightmare they wrapped in family ties was dead by law. She also ordered Delilah's family to pay back a portion of your legal fees, Darian added. Not everything, but enough to sting. I leaned back against the counter, the room suddenly too quiet. That's not even the best part, he continued. Judge Reyes referred the entire mortgage forgery case to the district attorney. Fraud. Identity theft. They're opening a criminal investigation. That hit harder than I expected. Not because I wanted them in jail, but because for the first time, it wasn't just me carrying the weight of what they did. Now the state saw it too. Now someone with power acknowledged, this was wrong. There was a silence between us. Darian knew me well enough to let it breathe. Finally, I exhaled, slower than I'd been breathing in weeks. Thank you, I said. It wasn't enough. It never could be. But it was all I had. After we hung up, I didn't celebrate. I didn't run outside or blast music or open champagne. I stood alone in that small kitchen, the kettle now screeching on the stove, and I cried. Just a little. Quietly. Not out of sadness, but from something deeper relief. The kind that washes through your bones and lets you believe, even for a moment, that you are safe again. Later that night, I got one last voicemail from Delilah. Her voice was calm, cold. No fake tears this time, no dramatic pitch. I hope your precious pride keeps you warm, she said. Click. That was it. No apology. No admission. Just one last dig at the man who refused to fund their delusion. I didn't respond. I didn't call back. I didn't even save the voicemail. I simply deleted her contact and, with it, the version of her I had clung to for too long. It's strange how people can tear your life apart, drag you into court, lie under oath, and still blame you for walking away. As if your refusal to be used is the ultimate betrayal. But I wasn't interested in playing their villain anymore. They could keep their narrative. I had won something more important than money or validation. I had won back the right to define myself. That night, I turned off my phone and sat by the window. The city outside kept moving, cars slicing through wet streets, people rushing past, oblivious to the quiet war I had just finished fighting. It struck me, then, how many others must be out there in the same kind of silence. People who said no to manipulation and were painted cruel for it. People who lost relationships, jobs, homes, not because they failed, but because they chose boundaries. I used to think strength was about endurance, about how much you could carry before you broke. But now I knew better. Strength was the refusal to carry what was never yours in the first place. I'd spent so much time trying to explain myself to people who didn't want to understand, who only wanted to be right. But the beauty of Judgment Day was this. Someone objective finally saw through the performance. Someone listened not to the loudest voice, but to the one with evidence. I thought about the house in Brookline. Whether Tricia still tried to live there. Whether she stood at those same windows thinking the world had wronged her. The irony was cruel. They had gone to such lengths to steal something they never could keep. The mortgage company had voided the agreement. The title was frozen in legal limbo. Tricia had been evicted. The house sat empty now, a monument to entitlement. I moved on. Literally. A month later, I signed a lease on a new condo in Beacon Hill. Nothing flashy, just clean lines, exposed brick, and no ghosts hiding in the kitchen drawers. A space that was entirely mine. No hidden strings. No family plans wrapped in betrayal. Most of the friends who used to text me stopped by then. I wasn't the fun guy anymore. I was the guy who took his wife and in-laws to court. The one who didn't just let it go. I used to feel the ache of those disappearances. Now, I saw them for what they were, natural filters. Anyone who saw boundaries as cruelty was never truly on my side. But not everyone vanished. One evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it ring out. Something told me to answer. Hello. A woman's voice, soft, uncertain. Hi, this is Evelyn. Delilah's aunt. I froze. Yes. I heard what happened. I wanted you to know something. I didn't speak. I let her continue. They did the same thing to my ex-husband. Years ago, with a business loan. They forged his signature. Said it was family. He didn't fight back. He just paid it off to avoid shame. I think about that every day. My throat tightened. Why are you telling me this? Because you didn't let them do it again. And I needed you to know you're not crazy. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like the villain in someone else's story. I felt like the survivor of my own. When I hung up, I stood in front of the mirror, looking into the face of a man who had been lied to, exploited, dragged through the dirt, and didn't let it define him. That was Judgment Day. And I wasn't just judged by a court. I was judged by my own reflection. And for the first time in a long while, I saw someone worth defending. Winning felt nothing like I thought it would. No fanfare. No victory parade. Just silence. The kind of silence that seeps in after a storm has passed. Not peaceful, not triumphant, just emptied. I sat alone in my new condo, cardboard boxes half unpacked, my name finally untangled from that fraudulent mortgage. The court orders were sealed. The judgment rendered. Delilah and her family were barred from contacting me for 90 days under court mandate. And yet, I still checked the peephole before opening the door. I still looked over my shoulder in the grocery store. I still hesitated when my phone buzzed, expecting another trick, another twist, another ambush cloaked as family. But there were no more courtroom appearances. No more emails from Margot. No sudden text from Ruben playing the misunderstood patriarch. Just the long, slow drip of reality settling in. I was free, legally, but I didn't feel it yet. My marriage was over, and not in the loud, emotional, closure-filled way most people imagine. There were no screaming matches, no tearful apologies or slamming doors. Just a silence that confirmed what I already knew. Whatever love had existed between us had been devoured by entitlement. Delilah hadn't called again. Not since that voicemail. I hadn't expected her to, but I couldn't lie to myself. It still stung. Not her silence, but the fact that I had once believed in her so completely. I used to memorize the way she stirred her tea, used to write notes on napkins just to make her laugh. I believed in that woman, the woman I married, but she didn't show up in the courtroom. That woman didn't forge my name or humiliate me online. That woman didn't orchestrate a theft and call it sisterly love. So I had to mourn two things. The relationship and the version of her I invented just to make it all make sense. Meanwhile, Delilah's family had begun unraveling in the public sphere. Ruben and Margot tried to spin the loss as an unjust technicality, but the screenshots leaked. The email chain, the court transcripts. Once the DA confirmed an investigation was underway, people started stepping back from them. Slowly at first, then in waves. The friends who had commented, "family over ego," suddenly deleted their posts. The ones who called me cold? Silent now. Not because they understood, but because the tide had shifted. And loyalty, for most, was never about truth, it was about convenience. Trisha had been evicted from the house 3 weeks after the ruling. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't gloat. But I did allow myself a long, deep exhale when I heard. The property sat empty now, locked in probate and legal complications. An expensive monument to their arrogance. They thought they could will reality into submission, that paperwork was a formality and my name was just a stamp to borrow. But now the locks had changed, the utilities were shut off, and the lawn grew wild without a caretaker. And all I felt was closure. I moved on quietly. I didn't post about the case. I didn't drag their names through social media the way they had mine. I'd said what needed to be said in court. And I learned that sometimes the loudest message is walking away with your dignity intact. The condo I rented was smaller than our old house, but it was mine. I chose the colors, the furniture, the ugly lamp I secretly loved. No one consulted me on their plans. No one expected me to foot the bill for someone else's dream. I didn't have to fight to say no. I simply did. And in that freedom, I rediscovered something I'd forgotten. Peace doesn't always look like celebration. Sometimes, it looks like stillness, like coming home to yourself. I lost friends. That was the hardest part to admit. People I'd known for years vanished in the fog of scandal. Some stayed quiet, unsure of how to navigate the awkward middle ground. Others openly sided with Delilah, either because they genuinely believed her or because she fit their narrative better than I did. The well-dressed villain husband. The emotionally distant tech guy who didn't understand family values. I didn't chase those friendships. I let them fall where they may. And yes, it hurt. But I reminded myself over and over again. If someone's loyalty depends on a version of you that bends, breaks, or bleeds to be accepted, then their loyalty isn't real. It's performance. But not everyone disappeared. One person reached out when I least expected it. Aunt Evelyn. Delilah's estranged aunt. I barely knew her, just vague memories from a few family events. She called one evening, her voice shaking. They did the same thing to my ex-husband, she said, after some stammering. A business loan. Ruben and Margot signed it behind his back. Told him it was for the family. He paid it off to avoid embarrassment. They drained him. He left and never recovered from it. Her voice cracked. I've watched this happen twice now. You fought back. I'm proud of you. I wasn't prepared for that. Not from her. Not from anyone connected to them. Thank you, I said softly. That means more than you know. You're not the villain they made you out to be, she added. They just hate people they can't control. That one line stayed with me. Maybe that had always been the issue, not money, not love, not duty. Just control. I wasn't useful to them anymore, so I became dangerous. And when I refused to play the part, they rewrote the script and cast me as the threat. That realization didn't make me bitter. It made me careful, more discerning. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recovery. I wanted a life that didn't require constant defense. And slowly, I started building that life again. I focused on work. I joined a gym again. I bought a used record player and collected albums I used to love in college, Miles Davis, Sam Cooke, old Motown vinyls that crackled when the needle hit them. Music felt honest, like it wasn't trying to manipulate me. I started journaling, writing down everything they said, everything I felt. Not for publication, not for a court record, just for me. A map through the wreckage. Because even after you win, you still have to walk back through the battlefield and collect what's left of yourself. But the most surprising part of the aftermath? I no longer wanted to explain. Not to the people who left. Not to the ones who doubted me. Not even to Delilah. Let them think what they want. Let them whisper. I had my name back. I had my freedom. I had my peace. That was the real win. 6 months passed before I even knew how to speak about it out loud. Not just the facts. That part was easy. People liked facts. They were neat, digestible. Forged documents. Court rulings. Mortgage nullified. Divorce finalized. Done. But facts alone couldn't explain what it felt like to be rewritten by people who once used your name like a shared language. They couldn't tell anyone how it felt to be the villain in a story you never agreed to be part of. So I did what I've always done when silence gets too loud. I wrote. Not about Delilah directly. Not about her family or the lawsuit or the courtroom tension that still haunted my sleep. I wrote about patterns. About the kind of financial abuse people don't talk about. Not the credit card thefts or secret bank accounts, but the quieter crimes. That you make more, so you owe more kind. That we decided for you kind. I wrote about being told your financial stability cancels out your right to say no. About being emotionally guilted into decisions you never consented to. I didn't use names. I didn't need to. The people who needed to see themselves in those paragraphs would. And the ones who didn't? They'd know someone who should. At first, I thought maybe 10 people would read it. A couple reposts, some polite likes. But something strange happened. It grew. Quietly. Organically. Hundreds of shares. Then thousands. Comments from people I'd never met pouring in from across the country. One man wrote, I thought I was just being cold-hearted. Turns out I was being manipulated. A woman commented, my ex used to say, we're married, so your debt is my debt. But only when it was hers. And then there was Jude. His message came late one night. Reading your story saved me from co-signing a $200,000 loan I didn't believe in. I was about to sign just to keep the peace with my fiancé's family. I thought saying no made me less of a man. Your words gave me a spine again. I stared at that message for a long time. Because that made every courtroom hour worth it. Every drain night. Every friend who disappeared when it wasn't convenient to stay. Because maybe that's what healing looks like. Not just moving on, but reaching back, building a rope for someone else. Delilah had tried to make me the villain for refusing to pay. But by speaking up, I had become something else entirely. A lighthouse. A warning. A guide. I kept writing. I started doing guest blog pieces on financial autonomy and relationships. A podcast host reached out and asked me to speak about economic boundaries and masculinity, a phrase that sounded foreign and familiar all at once. I almost declined. Then I remembered how small I had felt when Delilah placed that envelope on the table, how cornered, how quiet. So I said yes. During the interview, the host asked, what made you finally decide to push back? I didn't have to think, because if I didn't, the pattern would repeat. Maybe not to me, but to someone else. And maybe next time, that person wouldn't have the resources or support. Maybe they'd lose more than I did. Their credit, their future, their sense of self. I had to draw the line not just for me, but to prove the line existed at all. He paused for a moment, then said, "It's rare to hear a man speak about financial abuse so openly." But I wasn't being brave. I was being honest. And I had spent too long being quiet for people who never deserved my silence. Around that same time, I was invited to attend a private roundtable on financial literacy and emotional manipulation, hosted by a nonprofit that supported victims of financial exploitation. Most of the attendees were women, their stories full of heartbreak, resilience, and rebuilding. But when I introduced myself and shared my story, something changed in the room. Eyes widened. Heads nodded. One woman even whispered, "They do it to men too." Yes. Yes, they do. Abuse doesn't always come with bruises. Sometimes it arrives with a smile and a pin you didn't hand them. Sometimes it says, "It's just money," while carving away your autonomy like it's a disposable thing. Later that night, I stayed behind to help pack chairs. A woman, maybe in her early 30s, approached me. "Can I ask something?" she said. "Do you still believe in marriage?" After what happened, I thought about it. Really thought about it. "I believe in partnership," I said. "I believe in love that doesn't come with fine print. But marriage?" I smiled faintly. "I believe it should be earned. And re-earned. Every single day. Not assumed. Not demanded. And definitely not weaponized." She nodded slowly. "My boyfriend's family keeps pushing me to co-sign on his sister's business loan. I keep saying no. They say I'm not committed enough. He hasn't defended me once." "That's not partnership," I said. "That's pressure dressed as love." Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with relief. "Thank you," she said. I needed to hear that from someone who lived through it. I watched her walk away lighter than she arrived. And in that moment, I felt something crack open in me. A new chapter. A new purpose. Delilah's family tried to break me. Tried to make me doubt my instincts, question my worth, rewrite my story without my consent. But what they didn't realize is that all they did was sharpen my boundaries. Teach me what I will never allow again. I began talking more openly at work. Colleagues who once tiptoed around the topic now asked direct questions. "Is it true you got sued by your wife's family?" And I answered with clarity. "Yes. They forged documents." I fought back. I won. No shame. No softness to cushion the blow. Just truth. That was my armor now. I became the guy people came to when they didn't know if their instincts were valid. The one who said, "Trust yourself. You're not crazy. You're not selfish for saying no." One night, I received an email from a man in Ohio. He wrote, "I'm a father of 3. My wife's parents tried to take out a home equity line of credit under my name using forged tax forms. They said I was just being paranoid when I confronted them. I found your story through a financial blog. It made me call a lawyer. I'm filing charges next week. Thank you." I stared at that line. "Thank you." And all I could think was, this is what breaking the pattern looks like. Not revenge. Not gloating. Just refusing to stay silent. Just refusing to let someone else's shame become your inheritance. And as I sat at my desk, the city humming outside my window, I finally understood something. Healing isn't just about distance from pain. It's about turning the wreckage into a warning sign for someone else. Delilah didn't destroy me. She taught me. Taught me that love without respect is control. That generosity without choice is theft. That family, real family, doesn't require paperwork, but it sure as hell doesn't erase it either. I was no longer angry. Not even bitter. I was awake. And sometimes, that's the most dangerous thing you can be. 1 year to the day. That's how long it had been since the judgment came down and the life I once shared with Delilah disintegrated under the weight of truth. The calendar didn't lie. I'd circled the date months ago in red ink, back when I still thought it might hurt to remember. But when I woke up that morning, there was no bitterness, no dread, just a strange kind of stillness. The kind that arrives when something is truly behind you, not hidden in a box, not buried under distraction, but processed, burned clean. That afternoon, I walked into the same courthouse where everything had once unraveled. But I wasn't here to stand trial. I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't even angry. I was a guest speaker, invited by a local nonprofit that promoted financial literacy, autonomy, and protection against financial abuse in personal relationships. The irony didn't escape me. A year ago, I'd walked through those doors terrified, my name dragged through legal mud. Today, I walked in upright. Whole. Free. The panel was small, maybe 40 people. Some attorneys. Some survivors. Some college students taking notes for a finance class that dared to blend numbers with emotional reality. I took my seat beside a woman named Lena, who'd once testified against her ex-husband after he opened 6 credit cards in her name. She squeezed my hand before we started. "Glad you said yes to this," she whispered. "People need to hear your kind of story." When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read from the prepared notes. I looked out at the crowd, at the young man in the back with his arms crossed like armor, at the woman near the aisle whose eyes were already glassy, and I told the truth. I was married. I loved her. Or at least, I loved who I believed she was. One night, she handed me a sealed envelope at the dinner table. Inside were mortgage documents. My name, my credit, my signature, none of which I had ever consented to use. The house wasn't for us, it was for her sister. And the plan wasn't discussed, it was decided. A few people shifted in their seats. I was told I could afford it. That family doesn't need permission. That love sometimes means paying for things without being asked. And when I objected, they said I was being selfish, cold, ungrateful. I paused. I didn't need to dramatize it. The quiet was doing that on its own. I was sued for nearly $500,000. I was painted as a villain. Friends left. Co-workers whispered. Even strangers had opinions. But I fought back. I fought not just to clear my name, but to make sure the next person who ends up in that situation knows they're not crazy. And not alone. The applause was quiet but real. It wasn't for entertainment, it was for recognition. For validation. After the event ended, I stood in the hallway chatting with a few guests when a young woman, maybe early 20s, red braids pulled into a bun, oversized hoodie hanging off her shoulders, approached me with hesitation. "Hey," she said. "Can I ask something personal?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside with her. "My boyfriend's family wanted me to co-sign a mortgage for his sister," she said. "Said it was a test of loyalty, that I needed to prove I was serious about being part of their family." I said no. "He broke up with me 2 weeks ago." I saw the hurt in her eyes, raw and fresh. I nodded. "I'm sorry that happened, but I'm proud of you for saying no." She looked up, surprised. "Really? Sometimes," I said, "the house you refuse to pay for is the house that saves your life." She exhaled, and it wasn't just relief. It was release. Like she'd been holding her breath in a room full of expectations and finally found a door out. She smiled, offered a quiet, "Thank you," and walked off into the afternoon. I stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the city. Boston buzzing with its usual rhythm, and I thought back to the house. The Brookline Colonial. The symbol of everything I had once been tricked into carrying. It still sat empty, tied up in legal complications, probate disputes, liens, foreclosure threats. It was no longer a home. It was a cautionary tale in vinyl siding. And I wasn't angry about it anymore, because it had become the house that built me. Not literally. I never stepped inside, never hung a picture or drank a glass of water from its tap. But it shaped me all the same. It was the cost of my awakening, the boundary I never knew I was allowed to draw until they crossed it. And in surviving it, I learned that freedom doesn't come from being untouched. It comes from refusing to let the damage define you. I took a long walk after I left the courthouse. No destination, just a need to move. The streets were slick from a morning rain, and the air smelled like sidewalk steam and warm pretzels from a food cart nearby. I passed a group of high school kids waiting for a bus, 2 lovers arguing in hushed tones, an old man feeding pigeons from a bench. Life was moving on, unconcerned with my story. And that was a strange comfort, knowing that my pain wasn't permanent. It was a chapter, not the whole book. I passed by a realtor's office with a big window display. Photos of smiling families and staged kitchens, words like dream, home, forever. I paused, looked in. Then I kept walking. Not because I didn't want a home again someday, but because I'd stopped searching for it in places built by other people's expectations. My home now was internal. A place no one could forge documents to take. A place built on clarity, on hard-won truth, on silence I had finally made peace with. That night, I sat on my balcony, drink in hand, city lights flickering like quiet applause. I thought of everyone who had called me selfish for not helping. Thought of how little they understood. Sometimes, saying no is the most generous thing you can do for yourself. Sometimes, walking away isn't quitting, it's reclaiming. Sometimes, survival doesn't look like a victory lap. It looks like a man sitting in the quiet, no longer trying to explain his worth. It looks like a closed chapter, signed not with rage, but with resolve. The house nearly ruined me, but the boundary I built in its shadow, that saved me.